A lot of people have never seen the other Exorcist sequels, and it really shows. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. As part of my Exorcist review series, today I'm going to be talking about the sixth film in the Exorcist franchise, 2023's supernatural horror sequel, The Exorcist Believer. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Exorcist Believer stars Leslie Odom Jr., Lidya, Jewett, and Dowd, and was directed by David Gordon Green. Set 50 years after the events of The Exorcist, it tells the story of a father whose teenage daughter and her friend become possessed by a familiar demon. Love them or hate them, legacy sequels are here to stay. Serving as franchise reinvigorators rather than remakes or full reboots, these sequels are decades later follow-ups to well-loved movies, often incorporating characters from the original film and continuing long-dead storylines. Legacy sequels aren't restricted to any one genre. We've had sci-fi with Blade Runner 2049 and Terminator Dark Fate, action and drama with Top Gun Maverick, comedy and fantasy with Bill and Ted Face the Music, but it seems like horror has been the breeding ground for many legacy sequels as of late, including Halloween 2018 and the rest of the Halloween reboot trilogy. David Gordon Green is back with another proposed legacy sequel trilogy to follow up a classic horror film, this time The Exorcist. Understandably, this trilogy prospect has generated some strong reactions, mostly negative. A lot of people aren't particularly big fans of the concept of legacy sequels to begin with. People get very protective of the things they like, after all. There was also fairly mixed reception for David Gordon Green's previous horror trilogy, Halloween, so there's a bit of an overarching sense of mistrust out there of his handling of another franchise like this. But as with Halloween 2018, I don't think anybody going to see The Exorcist Believer expected to be better than the first film. So comparing it on a quality level like that is just silly. It's a sequel, something the Exorcist franchise has never excelled at. All of the films in this franchise certainly have their fans. I like The Exorcist 3 a good deal, but even for a long-running horror franchise, the sequels and prequels here have always been subpar, and only loosely connected to the original film. So in the context of the mess that this franchise has been since 1977, The Exorcist Believer is actually pretty decent. This sixth installment of the Exorcist franchise does its best to blend old and new. Its best isn't quite good enough, but it's a reasonable attempt at least. Like all legacy sequels, it definitely plays on nostalgia. It features a few characters that fans of the franchise have a connection with. It's got some solid makeup effects. It's the closest to the original in terms of the story and tone that we've gotten from any of the sequels. And it follows familiar plot beats. A nice kid getting possessed, a single parent doing anything they can to help their kid, uncomfortable hospital scenes, an exorcism. Now, with a possession exorcism movie, you're bound to encounter a lot of familiar elements. There are only so many things you can do with that type of story, but I will say that there are enough tweaks and subtle changes to this that make it feel fresh and not just a rehash of the 1973 original. A double possession, multicultural, multi-faith exorcism components, even a more communal effort to solve the problem. It doesn't reinvent the possessed wheel or anything, but it does an okay job at being familiar enough to please fans, but different enough to warrant its existence. I mentioned the nostalgia component to this film before, and that's something that's really important, but challenging for legacy sequels. It's hard to find the right balance of nostalgia. Too little, and you can't grab onto the fans. Too much, and it can come across too fan-servicey, and like it's a soulless cash grab relying on our attachment to the original film. The Exorcist Believer kind of falls in the middle. It's got its fan service references and callbacks, characters, the score, plot beats, but it doesn't do a great job of incorporating them. Rather than crafting the story to interweave the nostalgic elements like we see with Halloween 2018, this film kind of just layers them on. I wouldn't be surprised if the script began its life as a random standalone possession movie before somebody said, hey, what if this was set 50 years after The Exorcist? The connections, characters, and nostalgia don't feel like they were tacked on at the last minute or anything, but they aren't as integral of a component of the story as they initially seem. So for as enjoyable as the nostalgic elements can be, the way they're incorporated into the film highlight just how underdeveloped these components of the story really are. This underdevelopment doesn't make the film confusing like it does to some of the other installments in the franchise, but it does leave things feeling a bit hollow at times. Combined with some uneven pacing and a rushed third act, we end up with a story lacking the gravitas expected of a follow-up to The Exorcist. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does beg the question of where things are going to go from here for this trilogy. Not only in terms of the story, but also in terms of tone and thematic focus. This isn't as promising of a trilogy start as Halloween 2018 was, but it has the pieces to potentially lead to something interesting. If you directly compare The Exorcist Believer to the 1973 original, it doesn't come close. But if you look at it as a sequel, it's decent. However, if you compare it to the existing sequels and prequels in this franchise, it's actually pretty good. It all depends on your frame of reference and experience with the franchise, which, like the Halloween trilogy, is bound to lead to some spirited debate. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the makeup. This film isn't without its moments of CG, but the practical makeup effects were a pleasant throwback to this franchise's past. The transformation of Linda Blair over the course of the original Exorcist is still a cinematic makeup feat that has yet to be topped in the series, but the transformations of the two girls here are also pretty impressive. While never quite as gross as Reagan, the possessed Angela and Catherine are definitely creepy looking, and certainly a visual callback to the original 1973 possession look franchise fans have loved for 50 years. The second pro has got to be the connections to the original film. This is a legacy sequel, so these connections and the nostalgia they induce are intended to be part of the film's draw. And they are, to an extent. Although I think other legacy sequels have handled this aspect better, I do appreciate the story and character connections on display here. Things initially feel separate from the rest of the franchise, but once the story moves into the second act, it incorporates the nostalgic pieces in interesting and unexpected ways. I'm not going to spoil specifics for anybody who doesn't already know, but it was nice to see the returning characters, even if they didn't have huge parts in the story. On the con side, the biggest issue is how underdeveloped the story was. I guess I should qualify this a bit and say that not every aspect of the story felt underdeveloped, but many of the legacy sequel connection parts did, which is unfortunate because they're what I suspect fans are most looking forward to. There was some effort to craft a story that incorporated these things, but we were still left with the underutilized characters, dangling storylines, and a rushed plot. Perhaps some of these things will get fleshed out in the next two films, but it really should have happened here in the first film of the trilogy. Con number 2 is the thematic tone. This is another one that needs some qualifying explanation. So I think the film's tone is okay. It's a little creepy, a little uncomfortable at times, never really scary beyond some startling jump scares, but I personally never found the original Exorcist scary either. This film doesn't have the same atmosphere, but it's got its own modern horror thing going on. The aspect of the tone I didn't like was when the thematic elements of the film really got pushed hard at the audience. It took on a very preachy message feel to it that even the more religion-centric films in the franchise never had. It didn't really affect the story, I guess, but it stood out in the moment and kind of took me out of the flow of the film. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying The Exorcist Believer or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give The Exorcist Believer 3 out of 5 paws. Although it could never reach the heights of the original film, within the messiness of this franchise's sequels, it's actually pretty decent. It has some good makeup effects, some interesting new ideas, and some satisfying nostalgic callbacks. I just wish certain elements of the plot were a bit more fleshed out. I would recommend The Exorcist Believer to people who like legacy sequels. If you enjoy seeing characters and storylines from decades-old films get picked up in nostalgic ways, like we saw in David Gordon Green's Halloween reboot trilogy, then you'll probably like this too. And if you're somebody who likes the Exorcist franchise, sequels included, then I think you'll appreciate the quality here and what it does with the story. But if you hate the idea of legacy sequels, then obviously this isn't going to be for you, especially if you've only ever seen the original film and have no frame of reference for what this franchise has been like over the last few decades. If you liked The Exorcist Believer, I would recommend Halloween 2018. This is another David Gordon Green directed legacy sequel to a horror classic, but this one really gets it right. It blends the perfect amount of nostalgia and new, updated intrigue to create a satisfying 40 years later follow-up to the original Halloween. If you want to step outside of the horror genre for a little bit, you might want to watch Mass. This is another film about loss, forgiveness, and impossible decisions. Plus it features another strong performance by Dowd. And if you just want some more of the Exorcist franchise, the 1973 original is really the way to go. Probably the obvious choice, since it's the best in the series, but it's also the one that's set up for the characters and storyline of this legacy sequel. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Exorcist Believer? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite legacy sequel? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.